This is the Westminster Standard Podcast. I'm Ryan Beasy. Welcome. Today I am joined again by Thomas Rickard. Thank you for being on the program. You're the clerk of Westminster Presbytery, and our presbytery has sent up 17 overtures, perhaps a record. At least our presbytery holds the record for the number of overtures pending as of this recording, one day after the 52nd anniversary of the PCA, December 5th, if I did my math correctly, which is always iffy. Thanks, Thomas.
Oh, you're welcome. Glad to be on.
Well, thank you for making time. So, we've got these 17, I think, starting with Overture 17, which is helpful for those of us who are mathematically challenged. The only time that I recall thrown furniture was during math homework in about 10th grade. So that was perhaps not my finest hour, but we'll see. Maybe that was my finest hour.
Very Presbyterian of you. Was it a stool?
It was an object for sitting. Yes.
Yeah.
So let's just work our way down here in a moment. But before we look at the particulars, I want to talk to you about how would you characterize most of these? Most of them seem like minor fixes that you've spent, as a presbytery clerk. It sounds like you've noticed things, way the BCO could be improved. So how would you characterize most of these overtures?
Yeah. So let's kind of back up. How do we get to this point where these overtures, which are approved by Presbytery, that did come through a session,
they're not your overtures.
Yeah, correct. And so I've made the motion, and the motion has been passed. And so how do we get to that point? A lot of these overtures come from basically a list that I have made over many years, just through people making comments or arguments, and that comes through different things. I serve as clerk as our presbytery, and so I often will get questions about particular things. How do we go about planting a church, and look to the BCO to be able to answer those questions. I also, as clerk, there's a online forum email chain that gets sent around where clerks can ask other clerks questions. But also as clerk, I also serve as the secretary of review of Presbytery records and have been on that committee for some time. And so you get to be able to sit in a room with other men who are very polity minded and often opening their BCOs to be able to make a citation if someone needs to be cited. General Assembly finally votes on that, but RPR kind of puts those together. And also, as the secretary for the last couple of years, I have handled all of the responses, putting them into our report. And so I get to be able to see a lot of the responses that get sent back. And so a lot of these just come from, I would call them clerictures, that they seek to be able to clarify particular portions of our BCO, not necessarily thinking about the RPR members in the room, but the ruling elder sitting in a session meeting, the moderator sitting in front of the presbytery making a decision based on what the BCO says, and making it clear how we might then apply that. And so I do think a lot of them, not all of them, but a lot of them do stem from that concept of trying to be helpful to the ruling elder, and then also trying to be able to protect the rights of people in that decision. So I would say a lot of them seek to be able to protect the rights of members in churches.
Yes.
So that the presbytery or the session can use the principles of those fundamental rights to be able to understand those members. And so basically through making this list and then trying to understand potential problems or not necessarily misinterpretations, but often there's a broadening of the interpretation that it could go this way or this way. And so just trying to be able to say, I think this is the applied principle at work here in these overtures.
And where there's a lack of clarity presently, that doesn't help anyone. I appreciate. There was one that stood out to me, that if a matter is referred to presbytery from a session, that and we'll talk about this at length, I suppose, later, that the congregation of that session still has the right to complain against the reference, because you shouldn't. I think that's a great. An important right, that the people shouldn't lose their right to complain against an action just because session didn't handle it first. So, but did you say most of these are cleritures? So instead of overtures, cleritures.
That's what I've labeled
that.
them. We'll see if that works. I mean,
We'll
it
see.
doesn't work for all of them.
Not all of them.
They're
Yeah.
distinct,
Yes.
and so that they're ordered in the order of the BCO, but they're distinct, and some of them are do-overs, I guess some people have called them, where there was an overture that failed last year and trying to do that. And so, yeah, but I would say most of them fit into that, trying to bring clarity and help to the person who seeks to be faithful to the BCO, but they might not have read a lot of SJC decisions, or they might not have the commentaries at hand when they're trying to make that decision in presbytery or in session meetings. And so trying to help insert a phrase or line that might help them with that.
Yes, certainly. Well, let's start now with Overture 17, a very modest clarity there. What kind of feedback have you gotten? What I have seen on social media is just, oh, I can't believe they're doing the 17 overtures. Just because you can submit an overture doesn't mean you should. Well, cleaning up and editing this document that is really the product of dozens and dozens of authors seems like a good work, and this seems to be one example where there's just a little bit of clarity there. Do you have anything to say about Overture 17?
Yeah, I mean, I have a lot to say about all of them. It doesn't mean that you should say all, but what this seeks to be able to do is point, again, our BCO is very, very complex. It's compared to what it used to be in, when the Westminster Assembly approved a form of government, it was very, very simple compared to ours. Word count and then just the complexities of it. Over time, that has changed. And I think that's because of the size of the denomination. I think that the context of our denomination, just been in a Western American, and even just postmodernism helps, I think. But what this seeks to do, 17, just seeks to be able to point back to some of those fundamental rights that I think belong to a mission church that are found in our BCO. So, 1310, I think, is helpful. The reference used to be that 1310 would be how you would handle membership. But 1310 also explains that they should be given a 60-day notice. And then 2510 seeks to be able to explain the right of a congregation, a church, to be able to affiliate with particular bodies that they might want to see. So the hypothetical in this situation is missions church is not been taken off the ground, or it's not finally been rooted. It's not getting to the point where it's going to be particularized. And the presbytery says that we don't think that we can continue this kind of relationship. We think that we need to dissolve this church. But those people in that church might feel otherwise. And so this just seeks to be able to help say that presbytery should, give them 60 days notice. They do have the right to be able to affiliate with another body. And then if it is dissolved, then the members should be cared for according to 1310. And so that's what it seeks to be able to do.
And would it perhaps prevent a presbytery from dissolving a mission church without its consent? within that 60-day period, so that the members could all say, okay, well, if the PCA doesn't want to continue with this church plant, we can join with the EPC or the OPC.
Yeah, so 13.9 gives presbytery the ability to be able to dissolve a church. And it doesn't then have to be that it's according to their dissent. There will be an SJC decision that I think kind of summarizes that.
Mm.
That should be a very unique situation, such
Yeah.
as that the church has, ordinarily, if a church is going down and ceases to be a true church, then it should be done through discipline, however that might be. But there might be a situation where, the church just needs to be dissolved, and presbytery does have that extreme situation to be able to dissolve it without their consent. But again, that should be a unique situation
Mm-hmm.
where the presbytery has to prove that it is extraordinary.
Yes.
In this situation, it might be that the presbytery just cannot keep this. It's not free just to be able to dissolve a mission church. And then reassign the members. That I think that it should be helpful that there is that 60 days notice, and the church can try and make a decision what they want to be able to do.
Mm.
And so hopefully that just points to other things. These provisions are provided for and allowed for particular churches. All we're trying to do is saying here, if you are going to dissolve, here's the process that you would follow as a ordinary particular church. You follow them as a mission church. And so, opening up the BCO and you're saying, well, we're going to dissolve a mission church, they'd turn here and then say, there's a hyperlink to these other portions that we need to be able to follow, making sure that we're carrying those out.
That's very helpful, because members of mission churches do have fewer rights than members of particular churches. They don't get to vote on their officers. The presbytery assigns them an organizing pastor. The presbytery assigns them a session, and so where it's possible, I think it's wise and just that the presbytery be required to respect what rights they do have.
Yeah, and I think that can be a difference I think that, our, mission church model has been, we might have more mission churches continue a little bit longer because they want the help and support of the provisional session, rather than rushing in and trying to ordain one or two ruling elders just to be able to particularize. And so we probably have mission churches that are older than previous models. And so they kind of, the category of particular church and mission church, it's clear in the BCO, but the size of a church could be about the same. A mission church could be about the same size as a particular church, just with those kind of various models that we've got working in our denomination now.
Yes. Well, let's move on to number 18, a mother church to call a church planter. I suppose this is already happening, but here is simply codifying. So it's another cleriture, as you say. And it's helpful to stipulate that this is a lawful procedure. How have you seen the church hindered by this lack of verbiage?
I wouldn't say we're hindered by it. I just think it just helps. To my knowledge, we don't have people doing this because it's not allowed. There is that relationship there that we probably see very strong in church planting in our denomination, very successful model of a mother church sending out kind of like a daughter church plant. And so the session has a close relationship to that. And even former pastors of that mother church have a close relationship to that. We've got a church plant in our presbytery that has, former an assistant pastor has now gone out to be able to plant a church. And so our BCO now says that presbytery would call the pastor to be able to serve. But this then seeks to be able to add, kind of a category where the church calls them to serve, as an assistant, a good category for an assistant, a short-term role where the church calls this pastor to serve as an assistant pastor to be able to plant a church. Underneath that specific relationship that it is a mother-daughter church plant. And all this would do is just say who is the call submitted by, and who then has authority over that call. Ordinarily, as 5-4A says, that it's the minister called by presbytery. So presbytery calls the minister to be able to plant a church. Um, and so this case would say that the session could call a pastor to be able to plant a church, but then that doesn't break the line. The church plant is still then underneath the authority of presbytery. Presbytery needs to approve that call, and presbytery needs to plant that church. All it seeks to be able to say is that this pastor, and that relationship somewhat is underneath the oversight of the session and the presbytery. And this is helpful, really, maybe a little bit business model, but who's paying the bill? And majority of time when it's a mother-daughter church plant, the large percentage of that funds comes through the mother church. And so I think it's right that a session should be able to say, we're going to put you on administrative leave for now, for a period of time. If there's something that's happening, obviously presbytery needs to be able to handle that discipline. But just like a regular church, a pastor's caught and has an affair, you don't need to wait for presbytery to respond for the session to be able to say, we're going to hit pause. You're not preaching this Sunday. The session has the authority to be able to do that. And so it just kind of puts a little bit more authority into the session's hands of how that relationship between who's paying the bills and things like that. So, I believe that this is probably a very consistent, somewhat understanding of how the model works. It's just not allowed in the BCO.
And yes, because many churches will have a daughter church plant, and sometimes the session will be the same group of men is the temporary session for that church plant, and then the session of the church, and they'll have an assistant pastor who's functioning as church planter. So this would codify that. Well, thank you for this contribution. Now we have, we're on Overture 23 for some reason. Overture 19, another small change, just to specify that the relationship of church plant is the same civilly and ecclesiastically. What's the cash value of this change?
I think it's a small change. I think it just, again, has a point of reference, that a mission church does deserve the same rights as a particular church. And so that's basically what it seeks to be able to do. And so I think it's minor. I think it's just one of those things that having it written down clearly that you can point to, and then you can apply all the particulars of the particular church back to the mission church. So then don't need to go and change all the BCO to be able to say when a particular church and a mission church. You just say when a particular church, and now you can come back to this and be able to say, and the mission church as well. And so I think that just is a helpful clarification in that position.
So for people who don't like BCO amendments, this is helpful because it will reduce the number that are necessary for the sake of clarity. Is it just right there at where mission churches are defined? It says they have the same ecclesiastical relation. And I think this will help also regarding representation of the church courts, that a lot of mission churches don't realize they can send ruling elders to Presbyterian General Assembly, that they don't, it's not just the particular churches. Have you found some confusion over that in your experience?
I mean, not to the extent where there's been a lot of debate. I think just as long as we don't have this kind of, I guess, this double dipping of sending additional representatives, or just assuming just because they serve on the church, then the session would need to vote to be able to send representatives, and that would need to be clear.
Yes.
But yeah.
Well, good. So that 1920. This is an important one. What happens when there's no session?
Yeah. So this is just hypotheticals that are real and
Yeah.
have come up several times as our denomination grows and as it ages. We find ourselves in unique situations, and one of those unique situations is that it could be that a church is struggling to be able to find ruling elders because they either pass away, or their church is shrinking, they're not growing. um, how do we get to that point in this unique situation? Or you have a whole session just resign, um, and how do you then uh, have a particular church without a governing body? That's kind of the hypothetical situation in this case. And so it doesn't then automatically move to a mission church. It doesn't just happen by definition, it needs to happen by action. And so this just helps to be able to put out some of those principles, protecting the rights of the members underneath preliminary principle number 6, but also then not requiring the presbytery to assume original jurisdiction over the church to be able to do this. And so it seeks to be able to have this kind of transitional session the majority of the time, that a transitional session could be appointed by the presbytery. And their number one focus is to be able to either help that church transition to a provisional session or transition to that permanent session by calling congregational meetings and going through that process of election. And so it does grant presbytery the ability to be able to have that limited authority, to be able to appoint that transitional session for that specific time.
Yeah,
And
and
so
that's sorry.
it just helps walk um, a presbytery through in those unique situations. What happens when you have everyone resign? A congregation can't call a congregational meeting. It just can't.
Right.
It has to be done through either the session, but if you don't have a session, that has to be done through presbytery. Presbytery would then need to assume original jurisdiction, and then carry that out. This would just say they've got that power to be able to do that in that short time.
Yeah, when I was clerk of a presbytery back in the day, there was a congregation that hadn't sent representatives, hadn't sent minutes for a decade or more, and there was some question of does that congregation still want to be PCA? And we had actually gotten to the point where we said, if you don't send in minutes between now and our next stated meeting, we're just going to dissolve this congregation. Doesn't affect your property, doesn't affect your tax status, but you will be dissolved as a congregation of the PCA. You will no longer be part of the PCA. And then they sent in minutes, and it was actually a really beautiful the way it worked out. But one of the questions that has come up is, do you have a session? Because there's just one ruling out of the pastor's retired, or the previous pastor retired. And so do you have a session? And then the next question is, well, what if they don't have a session? How do we call a congregational meeting? Because it's not explicitly spelled out. But here it makes it very. It's almost color by number. This is what you do, and I think you're right, especially in rural communities. Even one of the churches that I preached for when I was a seminary student, shortly after I was ordained and had moved up, I learned that they had three elders, but one of them died, one of them resigned, and then they're left with one elder. And what does he do? So this is a very helpful addition. Thank you, Thomas.
Yeah, and then later on, it kind of what happens in that unique situation, maybe the potentially very rare, but how do you protect the rights of the members, and then also, um, you know, a presbytery thinks that it's potentially wise to be able to move this to a mission church uh, position. It was a particular church, and now it's kind of needs to be back to that, and there can be benefits to that. Um, uh, you know, uh, there's other things that mission churches have in chapter 5, and so it very very rare, but again, it would help. How does a particular church revert, change, whatever that term is? That was a hard thing trying to know what that term might be. But how is that possible, while protecting the congregation and their rights? And so just seeking to be able to do that in 13 and 14 is what this seeks to be able to do.
Yes, yes, because you got to balance the needs of the presbytery, the needs of the congregation, and the rights of the members as well. Excellent. All right, now I'm going to try to not lose the screen. Um, ministers from another denomination. This is a sticking point because sometimes you'll have a guy coming from uh, the OPC or the EPC, and what do we reordain him, or the Southern Baptist Convention? Do we reordain him? Is he already ordained? What do you do? So this is a helpful clarification. What do you think about it? Do you know the author of this one?
I know who sent it up. Yeah, so this is very, very clunky, and I don't know how to be able to fix it. But we just approved recently a change to 13-6, and I think we brought a lot of clarity to that. And basically saying the change to 13-6 is that presbyteries always need to, when a person is transferring either from within the PCA or outside of the denomination, needs to ask the stated differences. And that's basically the difference that we made. But in this restructuring, underneath B, this transfer from another denomination, we lost the terminology which was previously there of views and knowledge and views. So it used to be that the presbytery would need to examine a person transferring in knowledge and views. A person from the PCA would only need to be examined in a limited thing, but the other transfer. And so this basically seeks to be able to say that with our, if I read it correctly, and maybe I'm just not reading it correctly, but it would mean that we would have to follow 21-4, the whole portion. There's not the clarification of what it is, the knowledge and views. 21-4 also includes things like the thesis paper, the exegesis paper. And often my understanding is that's not what people do when they transfer a man in from another denomination. Maybe it would be better to even separate this out and say a person from NAPAR compared to another church, because it might be wise for a presbytery to a Baptist pastor is convicted and changed to a Presbyterian polity, and it might be wise for him to be able to write a theological paper on the visible church and who are members of the visible church, that he could expand that a little bit more than an exam. And so basically this seeks to be able to eliminate those kind of two things that I don't think a lot of presbyteries do. But again, it's clunky. And so it kind of says, here's what they need to do underneath that chapter. And then, you can do more, and it might be wise to do. But again, it's clunky. That was basically the impetus of it, was that we've lost the knowledge and views language that would help us understand what we're examining them in.
Yes. And then any additional trials deemed necessary. So if he is coming from the Southern Baptist Convention, you might ask him, something about casseroles and how much cheese goes in a casserole, or if there's no cheese in, is it a casserole? Those types of trials. But maybe not. Maybe it would be limited to theology and views and Bible and sacraments and things like that. But who knows? But it's hard when you're trying to bring clarity to a document that is really, well, more than 200 years old if we go back.
Well, the other option is that we just read it as it stands, and then everyone needs to use the extraordinary clause on those particular aspects and explain why they didn't use it. And that is an option. I think that's valid. And I think, RPR, the committee of RPR could then forward things to General Assembly to be able to say, and that becomes practice over time, that it's not that we start doing those papers, it's that we just start recording why we didn't do them. That's an option. This just, again, it's clunky. I don't know how to make it unclunky. And so, yeah.
Well, there'll be 110 guys in Overtures that can declunkify this in Louisville. All right. So what do we have? What do we have next? We've got
Well, we might not actually get 110. They might you might see the numbers diminish.
yeah.
They're just like,
They may
no, I don't
look at
want to
these.
serve this year. Yeah.
This, um, this one I thought was curious about. I've served a church that transferred presbyteries when I was in Mississippi Valley. I was just a candidate of ascension, but I was there when the church that I would then go on to pastor came in to Mississippi Valley from Covenant, and their ruling elders were examined by a commission. And but what is this? Is this 22? Uh, yes, 22 would specify you wouldn't have to uh, examine the ruling elders if they're simply coming from Covenant Presbytery into Mississippi Valley Presbytery. What prompted this change or this proposed change for you, or for Westminster Presbytery, I suppose I should say?
Well, this was just one of those conversations where, you know, what does any church mean? There's
Hmm.
no qualification over that. And so when General Assembly transfers a church in, um, do they, from the PCA passes an overture from both presbyteries saying that they want to change the bounds. Um, that church, as far as I understand it, is transferred in. The teaching elder would need to be moved. But in this case, the examination is handled by the session of the church. They've been duly elected, they've been duly called. The session is the one who examines that. Um, and so in the PCA, all you're doing is you're saying that the church transfers and the ruling elders also transfer with that church. And so, uh, that kind of the confusion. Normally, if you read it, any church here would say that any church, and normally that's the case, right? You've got a church that seeks to be able to come in from the EPC or another denomination, even Baptist churches, right, that have been convicted and changed their understanding and say we're Westminster, we're Presbyterian. Ordinarily, that's the process you would go through. But I think it's a little bit unique in the Presbyterian Church in America. All of that's handled by the session. And so if the elders have been ordained in the PCA and approved by that congregation, and how they would get past that examination is underneath the oversight of that session of that church. I'm not sure why the presbytery would need to re-examine the ruling elders. Now that the teaching elder is a member of the church, and so I can see that it probably is wise, maybe, to be able to have the commission serve and meet with the ruling elders. But as far as my understanding would be that if the General Assembly changes the boundaries of a presbytery, that church moves in. What then happens if the presbytery says no? The
Yeah.
bounds have changed, and then are they automatically kicked out? It's just one of those things. When you read any church, it doesn't provide any qualifications. This just be able to help make that clarity of what I think already happens, but maybe it doesn't.
Well, and I was opposed to this one when I read it. Thankfully, I couldn't vote at that Presbyterian meeting because then we would have had to draw it from out of omnibus. But after hearing you talk about it, I think I'm in favor. So maybe I'll pull a John Kerry between now and General Assembly and before I was against it. But the logic is sound that the ruling elders are members of the session as a court, and it's the session that approves their exam. So why would presbytery have any jurisdiction? They don't have jurisdiction over the ruling elders. And one would think that if there's going to be a boundary change, presbytery, if it's wise, will already send a committee or a commission to meet with that church to try to decide, is this church going to be a good fit for our presbytery or not? But I think you're absolutely right. Having heard you explain it, a presbytery doesn't have the right to say to the General Assembly, "We're not going to take this church that you put within our bounds." Now, the converse of that is normally when there's a boundary change, it comes from the two presbyteries agreeing to it. So this work should have been done. I don't know that it needs to be in the book, except for the case of non-PCA churches joining the perfect church in America. I mean, the almost perfect church in America.
Yeah, and I think also like you just follow that down, and then a boundary change. Does that then mean that the session needs to re-examine every single member? No, the membership role just transfers.
Yeah,
The membership role transfers. The session doesn't need to, or the presbytery doesn't need to say you need to examine them or we need to examine them. We don't trust your work before. The
right.
authority of the who ordains ruling elders and teaching elders is handled underneath the court of the session. Now, there can be situations where you don't have a session in a mission church that, and the presbytery needs to be able to examine ruling elders through either that provisional session or whatever that might look like. But this just seeks to be able to say that specifically, it doesn't need to do it with the ruling elders. Again, maybe it's wise for them to be able to do that before the overture is sent up
They
to
should
the
have.
presbytery. But also then it also is then not saying that teaching elders don't need to. A teaching elder is a member of
Mhm.
the yeah. So
Yeah. Yeah, this is a great change. Speaking as someone who initially was against it, but this is a great proposed change. Thank you, Westminster Presbytery. Um, I had 23 up here. Let's see if it's over here. Well, we'll just go get it. All right. This one, I don't know that I don't know that there's any recommended change in the substance, but just reordering. That very helpful.
yeah, so this is just a very well simple, but I think Presbyterianism surprises me a lot. We go in to prepare for a Presbyterian meeting, a session meeting, and you say, what are we going to talk the most about and debate in detail? And sometimes I leave that Presbyterian session meeting and say, I was way off. I just had no idea. But this basically just seeks to be able to reorganize and renumber chapter 14. It doesn't necessarily reorganize, just basically renumber. Chapter 14 is very, very long, particularly 14-1. I think from memory, there's about 15 subsections, and those subsections have points and other points. And so this basically just seeks to be able to break them up into sections that deal with what they're supposed to deal with. So, the 10 principles at the top, the nominating committee is just now would be underneath one section. And so it just seeks to be able to, instead of putting it all underneath 14-1, it creates all these new sections that help it in its structuring. That's all
Yes.
it seeks to
Yeah.
be able to do.
So that presume, and then you know better how to cite it when you've got to cite something, and that's always a confusion. Is it dash dash or is it number parentheses? Very very helpful for citations of the book. All right, so here again, Overture 24, ordination exams must be conducted by a presbytery, not just a commission of presbytery, because there are, in BCO 15, it says among the things that may be assigned to a commission, but it doesn't say anything that may not be. And I think there are some things that ought not be. And here's one that cannot be assigned, may not be assigned to a commission, an ordination exam. But of course, ordination is usually done by a commission. So any other thoughts on this one?
Yeah. So the line at the end says, when the ordination of a minister of the existing ones is committed by to a commission, the presbytery itself shall conduct the previous examination. So what that is saying is that if you're going to have an ordination and installation commission, presbytery needs to do the previous exam. But what that specifically says is that only when you're going to install or ordain someone via a commission, then you have to examine them. So there's kind of this sense where you could have a commission examine them, but then presbytery would need to ordain and install them. It couldn't be a commission. This just seeks to be able to say that presbytery always needs to complete the final examination of a candidate. The commission can be appointed to be able to install and ordain them. But here, that the final portions of ordination have to be completed by the presbytery as a whole. That's what this seeks to be able to do. I think that's how most people practice it, and how even some people have read that last sentence in chapter 15. But it just seeks to be able to say that those final portions of ordination and examination have to be done by the presbytery.
It's helpful clarity there, even if all of us assume. Well, what happens when things are assumed is things don't always work out the way we've agreed to follow them. So that's good. Clarity, consistency, and ease of reference with Overture 25. Here again, I don't know that there's much of a substantial change here, as much as just stipulating this is what it means. Am I understanding correctly?
Yeah, there are some times I think that I did, if I'm being honest, insert things that were not there initially. And what I mean by that is not that I'm just going and changing what it reads. I think just trying to, it's not merely just copy and paste, but it seeks to be able to do the exact same thing as what it's read currently. And so chapter 14 and chapter 21 are some of the most sought and most amended chapters in our BCO. And so we add things, continually add to our BCO. We kind of can lose that flow of thought. And so what this seeks to be able to do is to be able to group things together that are together. And so that's what this tries to be able to do. If you scroll down to look at the ordination, what it does is separates the educational requirements and then the examination parts of that, and then lists them underneath categories, or sins of notorious concerns. That was kind of just a subsection later. We put that underneath personal character. Well, that's what this overture does, puts it underneath personal character. There was several times where the extraordinary clause is kind of separated in our current one. This just puts it all together underneath 21-5. And so it doesn't, there's a lot of strikeouts, a lot of underlines. They're not strikeout and underlines of we're getting rid of stuff. It's just moving things around. So it's a little bit more easy for people to be able to read, and then, thoughts and things are combined together.
And that's helpful, I think, because there are some presbyteries that they're examining and ordaining someone every single presbytery meeting. Mississippi Valley, I don't know, there was a single meeting that I attended that we didn't have an ordinand coming and a transfer. And so for presbyteries like that, they know what to do. But a presbytery that doesn't necessarily, maybe a small presbytery, maybe there's 12 churches or 8 churches in that presbytery. And so when they're ordaining someone or examining someone for ordination, that may not be so fresh. And of course, there's checklists that Lawrenceville puts out, but to have it organized this way, I think will be especially helpful for smaller presbyteries to make sure that they don't get an exception of substance found when we forgot to examine him in his Christian experience, or we forgot to record the examination of his Christian experience.
Yeah, but also just, with that specific example of that experiential religion, that Christian experience, like we spent a lot of time talking about the importance of personal character, and adding that to our BCO. And that's not an additional part of our examinations. We just clarified that when we're examining someone underneath experiential religion and his personal character, we need to be able to ask them about their past sins of notorious concern, and ensure that they're living out that gospel-filled life, bearing that fruit in their life. And so it just seeks to be able to connect those two ideas together, not something like this is another part, because I think this is one of the most foundational, important roles, of what we do in our examinations. The qualifications for elder, rarely about our competency.
There's only one given, right? In Titus 3,
and so
Titus 1.
And so just trying to be able to connect those ideas together. I'm a box person. I like things neatly in boxes, and so this, was just one of those ways where I think it might be helpful to
I
see
too
those.
am a box person,
Yeah,
but different kinds of boxes, I suppose.
yeah,
But yeah, I think this is very helpful, and will make those checklists even better. All right, so only count presbyteries who submit votes. So if I understand it correctly, we have 87 presbyteries as of today in the PCA, and we need 2/3 of that 87 to change our Book of Church Order. And there are a number of presbyteries who don't vote, or who may have clerks who forget to submit the votes. Um, but here, it's 2/3 of presbyteries not abstaining. I think that could really change some things. What are your thoughts?
yeah. This is uh, many people would probably think that this is some form of politicking or something, that we're trying to change things in a drastic way. It's 6 letters, but I think this might just deserve a little bit of debate and discussion. Um, Basically, this seeks to be able to say only those voting presbyteries are counted in that 2/3. Currently, and this has been the ruling of General Assembly based on the terminology of the BCO, is that it's based on 2/3 of the presbyteries total. And so if a presbytery doesn't vote, it's counted as a no. And so this just seeks to be able to say only those vote are counted in that 2/3 total. And that follows kind of principles of, Robert's rules, because they're absent. They're
Right.
not there at the meeting, and yet you're saying that they vote.
Yes.
And so uh, it seeks to be able to say, and just, I enjoy reading minutes and looking at data. And when you have votes, um, you're looking at historical data, uh, you know, looking at how many actually said yes or no is helpful. But yeah, it seeks to be able to say that, but it also then doesn't limit um, presbyteries missing, they didn't vote that year, or the clerk didn't submit them that year. The submission, actually, there's no deadline to it besides before the assembly. And so the clerk really has no excuse to be able to submit those, um, or valid excuse, I should say. But what it seeks to then be able to do is to, um, a presbytery can then say, we didn't actually vote on this. We would like an opportunity to vote on this. Can we defer it for a year? That's a provision in the BCO that we're allowed to be able to do. And so it has a couple of times in General Assembly history that has happened, that there hasn't been enough submitted votes, and so they defer it. But yeah, this just basically just clarifies with those 6 letters that you only count those who vote yes or no, and abstention or an absence is not a yes, is not a no.
Yes, and I appreciate your reference to the Robert's Rules. That I've wondered, why do we count abstentions? It's you're by definition you are absenting yourself from the vote, but they don't count toward a quorum. They don't count toward 2/3. If it's in the RAO, for example, we have to amend the RAO. Those who abstain, um, they don't count toward that number, I don't believe. So this is a good minor change, but yes, 6 letters, but could be significant. All right, now on to 27.
Yeah, so 27. Trying
This
to
is brave
remember.
of you. This is very
Um,
brave of Westminster Presbytery
this
to
is
take capital.
this has been sought to be changed about 11 times and never has happened. Um,
Mm,
and so uh, we need to understand first that this is a very important part of our BCO. That uh, an, a teaching elder, this is who this is talking about, a teaching elder um, is underneath the jurisdiction of a presbytery. And so a presbytery um, seeks to be able to if something arises of doctrinal cases or public scandal, a presbytery should handle that, and it should have the original jurisdiction to be able to handle that. But what happens in a case where it doesn't? And the terminology at the moment is that it doesn't, it refuses to act. And that definition has raised lots of issues. And basically, there's this extreme situation underneath public scandal or doctrinal cases where the denomination might be bound somewhat by unable to be able to deal with something because the presbytery just they acted, but maybe they didn't act by pressing charges as probably should have happened.
They
And so
just investigated and found no strong presumption of guilt, and then the matter is
yes,
done.
and so what this seeks to be able to do is then try and formulate a way where the rights of the presbytery are not stood on, but General Assembly, when it needs to, can handle a matter. And so you have a case where notorious heinous sins or false teaching is occurring, public scandal, doctrinal cases, and it appears that the presbytery is not handling it. So the presbytery needs to first reach out to that presbytery through a report. That's one of the steps that is included here. So the presbytery then needs to submit that same report to General Assembly and request it to assume original jurisdiction. So what this does first and foremost is that then a presbytery's communication is then passed along to the presbytery. So it doesn't skirt around it and go straight to the General Assembly. It requires the presbytery first to go to that presbytery and give a report to them. They should then handle that. And so how it's written is three. That was changed in the Overtures Committee in our presbytery. But if General Assembly receives enough reports from enough presbyteries, then General Assembly then can do either two things. It can either then assume original jurisdiction or say that they need to be able to indict the teaching elder. And then it's just followed up through ordinary review and control, and then appeals or complaints. So it seeks to be able to say that the presbytery has that initial right to be able to hear the case, and a presbytery should go to that presbytery first. But it does say that there reaches a certain point where if General Assembly receives enough of these reports, General Assembly can either assume original jurisdiction, or most often what I think would actually happen is General Assembly then just tells the presbytery, you need to indict this teaching elder. And then they can go through that process. Evidence can be presented, charges, is he guilty or not? It's clear through a trial. And so basically that's the avenue of trying to be able to carry this out. That is very, very important that as a body, Christ has given elders to be able to administer discipline throughout his church. And it's not merely just ordinarily that's through the courts of original jurisdiction, but sometimes it needs to go to a higher level. And so that's what this seeks to be able to do.
And would this go to the General Assembly's Judicial Commission, or would it come up through overtures and General Assembly decides we're going to refer it to the SJC, or we're going to say you've got to indict him?
No, all judicial matters are handed straight to the SJC.
Okay.
And so this would be underneath that category. I don't know why it would come to the General Assembly.
As a whole.
It would be handled by the commission that handles judicial matters.
Well, that makes perfect sense then. All right, so now we come to one I think alluded to earlier, number 28. If a matter is referred from a session to a presbytery, the members of the congregation don't lose their right to complain. How would you envision this working? Would it be a trial of a church member?
No, a trial, they would be able to appeal that decision.
Right.
If it is an individual, so that they would be able to appeal that decision. But in this case, there's two rights that people generally have: to appeal and complain. Um, and so, and that's very, very important. Um, you know, church members do not get many rights. And that is one of their fundamental rights that I think we should seek to be able to protect. And so, in this hypothetical situation, a session sends a matter to Presbytery, and Presbytery assumes that matter um, with final disposition. It's not just a reference, give us advice. It is, that a Presbytery handles the matter. And it's not a judicial matter that's ending with appeal, or maybe it's that Presbytery does something and someone wants to complain against that action. If the session was to handle that situation, um, a church member would be able to complain against that action. If But that right is lost as soon as Presbytery assumes that reference to final disposition. And there's nothing in our BCO that says that a session needs to give notice to congregants. And so I did think about having that the session needs to give notice. But how do you do that if it's a secretive matter? You do only tell the specific people that are involved. And then will the congregant really understand within the 30-day limit what the potential effects could be? And so this seeks to be able to do it at the end, that because the presbytery in part is acting on behalf of the session. They kind of carry that out, and so it just seeks to be able to protect that right of the member in unique situations, in that hypothetical situation where a member loses their right merely because the session referred it to the presbytery and the presbytery assumed that final disposition of that matter.
It's all very reasonable and careful. Probably not something that will be utilized very often, but when it's needed, very important. Now we come to what is notice of appeal, a hot issue, especially given some discussions and dealing with some things in Florida. I'm aware of a case where notice was given of appeal when judgment was rendered, and the presbytery said, "You didn't give notice of appeal because it was not written." Well, here that would clarify that. Am I understanding correctly?
Yeah. So chapter 24 deals with appeals, and 42, sorry, deals with appeals. And there's two senses that notice is specified in chapter 42. There's the verbal notice, and then there's the written notice. 42:4 currently just says notice of appeal may be given the court before its adjournment. And so what we're not saying there is that they need to have a
Reasons for appeal, which
whole
specific
written
areas?
argument. You don't know what the court is going to decide, and so you don't know what the arguments are going to make. And so when you give your appeal, that's what your whole appeal is based on, that written appeal. You can't then introduce this extra category that you thought of later down the track and say, this is my basis of my appeal. It needs to be in that foundational document as well. And so what this seeks to be able to do is just distinguish what's a verbal notice that's done before the court adjourns, and then what's a written notice. And that's important when it comes down to -6 further down, is that currently it just says notice of appeal, stops that, suspends that judgment of that lower court until it's been decided above. And so is that written notice or is that verbal notice? Well, it just seeks to be able to clarify what happens. This overture seeks to be able to say, if it's verbal notice, it suspends it for 30 days. It gives them that ability to be able to then submit their written appeal. If it's written, it's suspended until the higher court has heard and adjudicated that matter. And so it doesn't then give a loophole to be able to say, well, if we interpret verbal notice in 42-6, then verbal notice can then just suspend the appeal. And then I'm not going to write a written appeal and submit it. It just puts that timeline on verbal appeals, that it suspends it for 30 days. And then then seeks to be able to then say written appeals, does it until the higher court has dealt with it. Why is this important? Because again, courts can err, and a court can suspend someone from important things, their ministerial duties, or even from the Lord's Supper. And so it just puts that right back in that person when they do appeal to a higher court, that their rights are not merely just stripped away. And so it just hopefully clarifies what those two different interpretations, they're there. It's just in 42-6, what are we saying when we say notice of appeal? Clearly spells out a verbal notice and the written notice and the difference between timelines.
Yes, because some people find that confusing. That when it's not specified, it's any notice of appeal. It could be on a sticky note. I plan to appeal, or it could even just be verbal. Well, we will appeal this judgment. But I appreciate the timeline there, the specificity for those of us who are easily confused, and the time to appeal is 30 days, isn't it? I know with a complaint you have 60 days, but appeal I think you only have 30. Am I remembering correctly?
Yeah, I always get them confused. That's why we have it written down.
Very well said. All right, well, let's move forward, lest we talk further about sticky notes and get in trouble. So this is receiving one of someone who's dismissed. The presbytery should record in its minute the date a man was received who was dismissed. This is something that's often overlooked. We've got that wonderful portal that Heidi Harrison maintains for us, but there's no once a guy's out, he's out. But the dismissing presbytery doesn't have to make any record of that. So this is a helpful. This would be a helpful potential change.
Yeah, I think they do have to make a record of that, and General Assembly have cited people for not doing that. The important thing is that who is the minister, licentiate candidate, underneath the jurisdiction of, particularly when you're talking about a minister. They don't then go into no man's land. They don't cease to be a member of any presbytery. They're a member of their original presbytery until their other presbytery has received them. And so that is very, very important. What happens if a minister is dismissed from a presbytery? He's not received from the other presbytery, and that could be a period of 3 months, depending on how presbyteries are. We're in Westminster, Blue Ridge Presbytery. They meet a week before us, and they have a very, very, very similar schedule to us. And so we dismiss someone to, in a hypothetical situation, to a presbytery that meets a week before us. It might not be until 3 months until they're received. What happens to that teaching elder if something happens and he needs to be charged? It's the responsibility. He's underneath the jurisdiction of that original presbytery. And so they need to handle it, not the receiving presbytery. He's not a member there. And so in that hypothetical situation, who has original jurisdiction is one of the most important questions that you need to start with when you're talking about charges, and especially with teaching elders. And so, the SJC, that would be a pivotal decision. And so what this does is seeks to be able to say you need to record it in your minutes when they're received. And so in your minutes, it's clear that you dismissed him, but also he was received. He just didn't disappear off your rolls. He's there, moved to another presbytery. And so that seeks to be able to just put it in our BCO. What we do with RPR and General Assembly is that this is practice. And so it just seeks to be able to put it there. So when someone's reading the BCO and they go 46-6, we need to be able to record the reception of that person into the other presbytery as well.
That is sound logic that you would need to record it. The previous clerk of Tennessee Valley Presbytery was quite incompetent and likely failed to do that. But the new clerk of Tennessee Valley Presbytery is just superbly competent. So Going forward, RPR will have almost nothing to do with Tennessee Valley Presbytery's minutes, I'm sure. All right, so now 31. This certainly is more than a clarification. But is it though? I wonder. Uh,
Yeah,
what are your views on that? Is this simply clarifying what we should believe, what the Bible already teaches, and putting that into practice? How would you define or categorize this one?
well, I think that a little bit subjective. I think in that situation, this I would say is one of those do-over to things that it came up before General Assembly last year, and some people voted it down, and they voted it down for various reasons. This helps to be able to clarify some of those reasons, I think, and put it in there. I'm very supportive of this. I think that it's very important that we understand that ruling elders um, don't merely just admit people to the table through their shepherding, ongoing shepherding of the people is very, very important,
Mm,
and that the keys of the kingdom are handed to the ruling elders. um, I think it is already implied in our constitutionally binding portion of our BCO. um, Unless you're going to interpret and just say it's interesting. But yeah, just prior to this, I think here, you've got your table. It's covered, decently covered, not inappropriately covered, but decently. It's got the bread and the wine, and the communications ordered gravely sitting around it or seats before it. You know, we sometimes will get into problems when we're not carrying these parts out. Um, but and the elders in a convenient place together. Why is that there? Why is it the elders need to be in a convenient place together? Um, if not, to be able to then distribute the elements. It's the role of the ruling elders
yes.
to do that, and I think that's very important. That I would say that it's there with why are the elders in a convenient place together? What are they? Why is that significant? Well, I think it's there to be able to say, well, because they should be the one assisting in distributing the elements. And so, that's common practice. That has been the way we get into disagreements when the people aren't gravely sitting around or before the table. And so maybe that's the issue, that people need to be able to think more about that. But it seeks to be able to clarify what was said last year, by saying, in ordinary situations, this is the responsibility and role of ruling elders, and they're to distribute. And what is distribution? A
Mm,
distribution center is where items go to be sent to multiple people. And so that's what distribution means, that here a ruling elder is handing it to multiple congregants, um, communicant members. It's not then passing, distribution is not passing it down the line. Um, that's not what a distribution center is. And so hopefully it just seeks to be able to clarify some of those concerns that were raised last year. But in a sense, people would disagree that it's in it and have certain arguments. For me, I think it's there already in the elders being conveniently in one place.
yes, I think so. And there are people who read the Book of Church Order as Nelson looks for flag signals, I think, and this is such an important part of the Christian life, coming to the Lord's table, and why would we not want? It's such a wonderful picture of Christ serving his people when it is the officers whom Christ has ordained placing the bread and the wine into the empty hands of the people of God. That this is Christ serving his people through his officers. The picture is really different though when it's some 12-year-old kid in a t-shirt or uh, some unordained woman taking the elements and distributing them. That's not someone ordained to that task.
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole discussion I think that we need to get better at
Hmm.
in the PCA and just broadly about ordination and what actually it is.
Yes.
Um, I think that we need to, do a little bit more research of historical positions and understanding that, you know, someone ordained is set apart for that, for specific purposes. And so the ruling elders have a very important role to play when it comes to membership, church discipline, and a part of that is delivering, distributing the means of grace through the administration of the sacraments through the teaching elder.
Yes.
And so, often I think we view a lot of things as merely just circumstantial. We've got bread and wine, and then therefore we should just, it doesn't matter how they're distributed. But I think circumstantial often is an unhelpful way to view a lot of things. The Bible says a lot more than merely just, let's just think about this on our own accord. What's the ordained office of ruling elder? How does it relate to the functions of the church and the relationship between the teaching elder and the ruling elder, and the role of the session and admitting people to the sealing ordinance, and how that carries out? I think, yeah. So
Yes. Will be some vigorous discussion, I'm sure, in Louisville. All right. Now, another one that may get some vigorous discussion. Not just minutes to be reviewed, but manuals and standing rules, because there's some question about how some of these agencies who are unfortunately in the news or topics of discussion are conducting themselves. How will this help us be more Presbyterian?
Yeah, so I think before, this was not any type of ill will towards permanent committees or anything like that. I think, I'm not trying to then, through the draft, the motive of this overture wasn't like, well, let's get them. It's just trying to carry on the practice that we see in, review of presbytery records, that it's helpful not merely just to review the minutes, but also the standing rules or manuals. A standing rule or manual sets up certain processes and procedures that the committee can then act. And so, we need to be able to, I think it's helpful to be able to see those processes that they've established. And then, to be able to review those. Again, not trying to, we gotcha, but that those standing rules might be referred to in the minutes. Well, what's that standing rule clause actually say? And so, it's merely just trying to be consistent with how we do it in RPR, and that can be helpful when you're seeing these common practices that are happening. And so, it's not trying to be vindictive or anything like that.
No, but it's just basic Presbyterianism. I remember when I was a when I was a clerk of a presbytery, and we would change our standing rules, and we would give duties to a particular committee. We created a judicial investigative committee. We assigned tasks to the theological examining committee, and one of the things we did as we made those standing rules changes was that the committee is to come up with an operating manual subject to the review of presbytery. And so we do that on a presbytery level. Why would we not do that on a General Assembly level? Or maybe other presbyteries aren't doing that, but I think if it's a committee, the way that committee is operating needs to be subject to the review and control of the whole court.
Yeah, I mean, it's just we do it all the time in our minutes. We'll reference, there's a couple of times in our standing rules where a commission can act on behalf of presbytery without presbyteries voting on that specific matter. A unique, one that we use in March, before March every year, is that the administrative committee acts as a commission to be able to approve our November stated meeting. That's because we meet in the second weekend in March, but the minutes are due to RPR about the second week in March. And so, and so when we record in our minutes that they acted as a commission, we just refer to our manual that has been approved by Presbytery by majority and has vigorous standards to be able to change it. That's all we do. We just reference it. We don't need to spell out that standing rule every single time. We just reference it. And so I think it's just one of those things that you've got these standing rules and manuals that committees might use. And it's helpful for them to be able to, for committee commissioners to see what those are.
Absolutely. Yes, because we don't know what they are. And I remember in a previous presbytery, somebody was upset with me for saying things that in his mind violated the standards of a permanent committee of the General Assembly. And I said, well, I'm not accountable to the something in a binder in a permanent committee of a General Assembly. I don't even know what those are because they're not subject to necessarily to the review of the General Assembly. Well, let's we're coming near to the end here. Minority reports for review of Presbytery records. Overture 33. Maybe. Yes, here we go. All right. So we spend a lot of time on the review of Presbytery records report, which is very important. But there are some people, and I'm not going to name names, who want to seem to debate every single exception of substance, and that takes a long time. How will this help us be more efficient when we come back together in Milwaukee? If this is adopted, will this affect our Milwaukee assembly?
That won't fix the problem that you, or the concern that you just raised.
The opportunity. It's
So
not a problem.
the opportunity that doesn't. This just seeks to be able to clarify who can file and give an intent to be able to file a minority report. Again, it's read there that any member of the committee, and so any member can be read very, very broad. You can sign on to a minority report. This just clarifies who those members are. Those members need to vote in the minority of the presbytery as a whole. So you can't vote to be able to say, we're going to pass this, and then sign a minority report or give an intent to be able to sign a minority report. You need to have that no vote in RPR to be able to file a minority report. It just seeks to be able to clarify. I think that's, how can you sign a minority if you weren't in the voice of the minority? It just puts in our BCO that we can see that any member doesn't mean just any member of the committee. There's a limitation then about that. You need to vote no. And so that's just where this comes from.
And men might, attempting to be a good churchman, say, well, I don't support this position, but I want you to be able to make your argument on the floor of General Assembly, so I'll sign on even though I'm voting yes. Is that something that's maybe happening?
No, I just think that it's just, when you open up your BCO, the discussion said, can someone who's, in committee of, RPR, can, any member sign on to the minority report? And the discussion was any member means any member.
Yeah.
But I think it's important that they need to be able to vote no. They need to be in the minority to be able to sign the minority report. They've got their chance to be able to voice their opinion through their vote. That's the important thing. And so they can't then just, if they want to be able to change their vote, they need to be able to do that in committee and to be able to say, I voted yes, I would like to change my vote to no, and to be able to have that voiced there. The reason why we have this number of at least 6 is that, you get a chance to vote, but you can't then just, one person can't continually bring it up and say, oh, I'm going to bring this up at, and file a minority report, because that takes a lot of time at General Assembly. What we have found is that in recent years, we just haven't had minority reports from RPR because of the time that is given to it. And so people are not filing minority reports. They're just standing up on the floor of Presbytery and General Assembly and then, removing things from the RPR report.
Well, there's still time for Westminster Presbytery to fix that opportunity as well. There's still an opportunity. It does bother me to the point of maybe mild annoyance when men will stand up and want to debate every single initial finding of an exception of substance. And I think we would make better use of our time to let those go to the presbytery, let them provide an explanation, and then if that explanation is not satisfactory, then we can debate it as a whole court. I thought there was going to be some kind of mid-level finding uh, forthcoming last year. Was I guess that effort failed.
Yeah, that becomes very confusing. And then also I think there's a lot of people, and I think rightly so, are cautious to be able to say that somewhat RPR becomes a commission to a certain level.
Mm.
It is a committee, and therefore General Assembly needs to be able to have the final say. But I do think that people need to be able to understand that um, an exception of substance is truly becomes a true exception of substance when uh, it the it's an apparent violation. And so when a presbytery gets cited for an apparent violation, it doesn't mean that they're guilty. They get a chance to be able to present their case. And that's often what happens. Either the presbytery agrees with that and says, we agree that we did actually violate the Constitution, but here's we've rectified it, we've fixed it, we've fixed our record. Or we agree that it was an exception, we didn't record it, but we did actually do it. That's often what happens.
And those would all be
It,
acceptable responses as far as the committee
exactly.
is
And
concerned.
so, instead of people standing up and, this is personal, not, you know, I'm taking personal offense. This is just me talking. Instead of a person standing up and, taking the time of General Assembly of 2,000 men, you talk for 1 minute, you're taking up 2,000 man minutes, of time. That presbytery can handle that, and it doesn't take up that amount of time. Now if after three, every year it might come up again, maybe after those those consistency, but even after three times, it then just gets to the SJC where they get to be able to present their case again. And so maybe before it's going to the SJC, it might be worth standing up and talking and having General Assembly vote on it. But it just, if Presbytery can handle their own exceptions, and then I think that's what I would encourage people to do. RPR is a long report, but it really carries no. It's not authoritative in itself, if that makes sense. It doesn't set precedent. They're not. It's an apparent violation. It's not saying you're guilty of this. It
It's not
gives them a
judicial
chance.
at all.
Yeah, and so we need to be able to say that that's what it is, and but this overture doesn't try and handle any of those. It just says who can say that they're going to file a minority report, and then who can actually file a minority report. They need to vote on the minority position.
And that is logical. Well, I think we have reached the end of the Westminster Overtures. Thomas Rickard, thank you so much for talking me through these. I didn't have that opportunity to vote on that, but I did get a text message from my clerk, my former clerk of my former presbytery, saying that he finally gave me the boot while we were on this call. So, as a full member of Westminster Presbytery, I'm proud that that our presbytery got to send these up. Thank you for your work on that. I know it was, speaking of man minutes, these were certainly hundreds of man hours that you devoted to the authoring of these.
Well, it there a lot of them are not major. A lot of them do insert just small little phrases or just reorganize things. They might seem overwhelming in in number, but I think taken one by one, they're not. There are some that I think will require a lot more debate and discussion.
Hmm.
Just because I wrote them doesn't mean that I'm in. I can't be swayed to vote against them. And just because our session approved them and just because Westminster approved them doesn't then mean General Assembly has to approve them or presbyteries have to approve them after General Assembly. And so this is the process I think that is helpful. And I think, um, I pray that they will be a blessing to our denomination, particularly as I said at the start, those people who are sitting down, having to make a decision, and what they have is their BCO. Hopefully, it helps them in that decision making process, and hopefully, it blesses the church. But this is the process that we have, and this is the work of churchmen. And so, yeah, it's Overtures, I think, will have its work cut out, not merely because of these 17. I think just generally there might be some potential big topic discussions that require debate. And that's why we're blessed to be able to have the Overtures Committee and the General Assembly and the presbyteries and the Second General Assembly to be able to discuss and hash these matters out.
Yes, indeed. Well, thank you again, Thomas. Thanks for joining the conversation on the Westminster Standard, which is the podcast of Jude 3. For more information or to support our work at promoting confessional renewal within the Presbyterian Church in America, please visit our website, jude3pca.org. Join us again next time. I'll talk to you then.